We discuss application security a lot on this show, and we know that the implications for code security have become even greater as cloud adoption accelerates software development. Shift Left bridges the gap between security teams and developers to find and fix vulnerabilities accurately from the source. Shift Left Core is an innovation in code security with industry-leading accuracy and speed. It combines next-generation static code analysis, intelligent software composition analysis, secrets detection, security insights, and contextual developer security education in one easy-to-use platform. Learn more and create your free account at securityweekly.com/shiftleft. Cloud-native development presents new challenges for security teams. Ephemeral workloads are scattered across services, and it's hard to identify resources, monitor configurations, and ensure compliance. Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto Networks is a comprehensive cloud-native security platform, delivering full-stack protection for multi- and hybrid cloud environments. It provides deep visibility, threat detection, and data security, as well as protection for hosts, containers, and serverless while enforcing policy guardrails. Visit securityweekly.com/Prisma Cloud to gain control over your cloud security. Whether you need to manage bots, protect cloud applications at runtime, stop formjacking attacks, or secure your web applications and APIs, only Imperva offers a unified solution to protect from edge to application and data in one tool. Imperva helps you achieve more, save money, and become more efficient with fewer security vendors needed. Start a free trial today to easily protect your apps and website with Imperva. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Imperva.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by John Kinsella. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list. Join and chat with us in our Discord server and follow us on our newest live streaming platform, Twitch. In our May 27th webcast at 11 a.m. Eastern, we'll explore the latest attacks against DNS and the latest techniques that makes it possible to discover and disrupt those attacks. In our June 3rd webcast at 11 a.m. Eastern, you will learn about pen testing tools and why every organization should be using them regularly. Register now at securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Finally, Security Weekly is elated to announce that we will be at InfoSec World 2021 in person this October 25th through 27th, 2021. This year, our annual partnership with InfoSec World is extra special as we are both business units under the Cyber Risk Alliance brand. What does this mean for Security Weekly listeners and InfoSec World attendees? Well, you get to see and hear from many of the Security Weekly team at the event. And you can also save 20% off your World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2021 to register using our discount code. Now, John, we have the news, and I jinxed us last week. Here, I dove into a 20-year history of IIS, bringing out the double decode vuln, saying how great it was that post that era. Microsoft invested in a lot of hardening. We hadn't seen any significant vulns in IIS for a long time. And then guess what? Some Microsoft internal researchers say, oops, there's a HTTP protocol problem here in IIS that not only is exploitable, but it's wormable. So, so sad. But
it's a special 20th anniversary vulnerability.
That's right, 20th anniversary vulnerability. The good thing is, to put it a little bit of perspective, it's on recent HTTP protocol stacks, or at least recent versions of Windows. So it's not necessarily as pervasive and as a internet-breaking type of vulnerability or worm that we're going to see in the ancient days of NIMDA and so on. But the one thing that did actually stand out to me is that, for as much as I'm joking a bit about this nice 20-year-old anniversary worm, is that there still was a lot of hardening, but I'd love to know, how do they find this, in the sense of, was this from their fuzzing, and they have great fuzzing tools that are just helping to make this hardened IIS stack remained hardened, and was it in some legacy code, since that's, I think, our word of the day for this episode, or was it actually in some new code? And the reason I asked that, in the sense of, Maybe if it was an older code that was just waiting to be discovered. But if it's a new code, it's kind of interesting to see how these vulnerabilities can still be reintroduced, and how do we get into that sense of who cares about SQL injection or who cares about memory safety anymore, because we just have better tools, better APIs, better language primitives that we're using, that we don't even have to worry about those types of vulns. So that's where my mind went when I saw this. So nothing earth-shattering other than, sorry, IIS.
You know what? It was interesting to me, and I'm still sort of taking in the details. I'm not sure if it exists. My initial thought was it existed. It's a new vuln, newly introduced, but as I look closer, it's not really clear to me. But I'm just thinking about this from the point of view of, like, we always talk about CI/CD and bringing it back to the last segment about how many times can you scan your application per day. How many times do the malicious actors out there have to rescan an operating system looking for new vulnerabilities which have been added? I mean, what's that process like, right? That seems sort of like a boring job for somebody to have to, after you've gone through everything, now you have to go back through again and look and see if there's anything new or different. That's got to work on automating that part.
What's new or different, or as well as, I think, to your point, who's looking at either the old and crusty parts of the code, or who's looking at the code with fresh eyes? And what you just said also made me think of the XM vulns that Qualys discovered, 12 years after the fact, just by, as far as we know, just doing a really good source review audit. So maybe there's still some worthwhile bugs out there to find.
And they actually had on, was it Paul's Security Weekly last week? For people who want to go and listen to an interesting episode, they had one of the core researchers that was working on that stuff. It was a fun conversation to listen to.
Yeah, go spread the love throughout the rest of the Security Weekly family. Also spreading the love for all things vulnerabilities, there's an article about So Long Internet Explorer. And of course, it did say so long. It avoided the cliche of so long and thanks for all the fish, although I don't know how you could figure out how getting fish in there is a good metaphor other than perhaps phishing against browsers. But I pulled in this article not so much specifically to talk about Internet Explorer. It's gone, been replaced by Edge, but Edge at its core has the same core of Chrome, for that matter. I wanted to more have this kind of here's one browser going by, but what if we reflected a bit on the history of HTML standards, and browser security? And to my mind, I think we've seen a lot of positive trends in the sense of browser architecture changes, in the sense of process separation, using RPC calls to shuffle back data from process to process, that makes it a little less impactful in terms of memory safety issues within the JavaScript sandbox. Those can't leak over into stealing cookies out of memory or keys out of memory, secrets, that type of thing. So I think there have been a lot of positive trends. And another trend that we've also seen is that HTML actually today is pretty much more standard. Now, we could argue that it's more standard because there's pretty much just Chrome, Safari, and yes, I won't forget you, Firefox, out there. So we've got kind of a consolidation of browsers of just implementing. But, in 2021, HTML standard is pretty much driven by the W3C. It was even just 2 years ago that the W3C, the WhatWG, the What Working Group, decided that rather than having HTML5 and HTML Next Generation, these two standards going in separate tracks, let's work together. And I think that's also going to help with just this idea of how can browsers implement security and implement sandboxing for the complexity of HTML and JavaScript a little more, where am I going with this? Standardize safely. So that was what I wanted to kind of riff on when I was thinking about the browser is dead, long live the browser.
Long live the browser. These things came out. Just make this a compact statement. These things came out in a point in time when we weren't thinking about browser security or HTML security. So, as with one of the other upcoming articles here, we've realized over time to sort of separate these things out and compartmentalize the various components, which we should be doing so. What I'm interested in seeing is, as we go forward, whatever the next big thing is, are we going to learn and not repeat that same thing? I don't have very positive thoughts on that, unfortunately, but that's sort of where my head goes on this.
So you're possibly worried that Flash is also dead, but who knows when the next Flash plugin will will emerge. Well, I think speaking of sort of that idea of architectures and architecture security or platform security, John, I know you like reading, so this week I threw in a 35-page PDF. And so hopefully, the 5 or 10 minutes that you saw before the show, you had a chance to read that through. But to cover for you, in the case you need to finish a couple of those pages, I'll introduce this a bit. This is a article, or a more of a academic article talking about the Android platform security model. And it's in the ACM Transactions on Privacy and Security. But it sounds a bit stuffy, sounds a bit perhaps academic, but it's a really actually accessible read about some design principles behind Android. And I pulled this in with a couple of motivations. One is that if you are a application security tester, or if you're focused on application security in the mobile platform, specifically Android, this could be just a good refresher. What is a little bit of the history over the Android 4.x up to Android 11, that 10-year life cycle of Android security changes. But it also, I think, helps if you are a slightly more technical product manager, or even just you're an engineering manager, in terms of reading about what are other people doing, what are other platforms doing, and considering their approach to threat modeling, their approach to fundamental principles for building in access controls, building in this idea of consent from the user, from the developer, and from the platform. And all three of those actors have to agree before a behavior is allowed or a data access is allowed. And I think these are the types of things that can be helpful just to learn from others. And so it's that sort of spirit that we read other people's code, we could perhaps read other people's architecture decisions, other people's platform security models, and figure out what aspects of those might translate to our own systems. So I'm trying to look at this in that sense of generalizability and learning from one domain and transfer it to another.
Yeah, I don't know what the big concern is. I mean, it's really not a 35-page paper, because the last 6 pages are all just references.
Fair enough.
I did give it a quick scan. It was interesting to see the amount of mentions of both seccomp as well as, we're just talking about isolation separation. So there's an interesting graph in there chart showing sort of over the generations of crazy Android version names, how they're sort of separating out some of the components around the device drivers. That in SE Linux and seccomp, I'm always happy to see. I usually think of SE Linux as a Red Hat thing, so that's sort of interesting. Whereas a lot of the rest, at least in the container side, the rest of the world has gone towards AppArmor. But the quick scan in those 5 minutes might give me enough that I sort of want to go back and read this.
Well, and I think you pull out for me one of the really cool pictures that a picture that does tell 1,000 words, as well as perhaps a picture that shows that was built by 1,000 vulnerabilities, is they show that decomposition of the media server. And we've actually talked in the past about media server being that area that's rife. It's a great attack surface because you're dealing with user-generated content in the sense of audio files, video files, images that are easy to manipulate, tend to be pretty brittle libraries that are dealing with all of those different codecs, and it shows how over time they've decomposed that specific media server into components with fewer and fewer privileges. So a great evolution of sandboxing. So yeah, great to see. Another thing that stood out to me too was the idea of encryption of data at rest and the shift from full disk encryption to file-based encryption. And a little bit of the explanation of what the benefits are to each, both on usability. So with file-based encryption, you can actually unlock particular files or decrypt particular files so they can execute without needing the user's key material. In other words, you don't need the user to unlock those files so they could see perhaps a particular notification, a particular alarm, something like that. Of course, you still need your threat model to say what is the sensitive data that we want to have user interaction to unlock. But it was a pretty neat walkthrough and pretty neat mental shift into the sense of how can we still maintain a good security model, but accommodate interesting features and interesting things that developers want to do. So lots of neat lessons. So I encourage a read. It is a relatively quick read, and absolutely you can skip the last 6 pages of references to shorten it a bit. That will bring us to another shift. Now we're going to shift back from talking about architecture models over into our favorite topic, or least favorite topic of the year, of supply chain security. So I had a couple things on related to supply chain security. One is just a relatively high-level essay from NCC Group, a blog post that was pretty neat, that was just talking about the basics. It's a great way to share with a team, share with executives perhaps who don't have an appreciation for what supply chain security means, other than we don't want to be the next SolarWinds. And so it's boiling down to the idea of we need auditable artifacts that we can securely and transparently trace back to the human readable source code. So we've got a dependency that we've used. What was the source code that was ostensibly used to build that dependency? And was that source code to that artifact tampered with in any way? And that's kind of, the easy way to describe supply chain security, but there's lots of places that supply chain security can go wrong. And we've talked about that a little bit in the last segment and a lot in the last couple of episodes too.
Yeah, if you're doing anything with security this year and you're not talking about supply chain, then you obviously don't have a PR person. Sorry. I think that the where I'm stumbling around on this one is supply chain. The title itself, supply chain security begins with secure software development. I'm not sure I buy that. I don't think. Maybe I need to think through it more. But like when I think about that, you can have secure software development and you can have a supply chain. And secure software development will definitely consume a supply chain, but I don't think it really guarantees the existence of one. Like one of the examples, I can't remember what talk I was on last week, but somebody was using it as an example. I mean, Go comes with a SBOM built into it, right? Your Go mod and Go sum files. And I think maybe JavaScript has something, or excuse me, Node has something top level-ish like that too, package.js, I think. So I realize those aren't the Cyclone DX, what they're referring to in here, and there's another standard as well, is it's could be SPDX. But I don't know. I'm not sold on the overall title. I think what he covers in the doc itself is good for people who aren't up to speed on this. But again, I think at this point we're preaching to our own choir. We need to get out and get this outside our little podcast, I think.
I think so. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight too is that also try to pull in tools, other things. One of the tools that came up was reading TLDR Sex, shout out to Clint, was this Tracy. And so we've seen here's an example of a tool that actually wasn't specifically designed for software supply chain, but kind of just a blog article talking about how to adapt a particular tool and profiling, using eBPF to profile system activity and say, this is how you can bring some monitoring, some observability into your build systems, essentially. And so I think we're going to see a trend of either readapting existing tools into deeper or across the supply chain components and figure out what do we need. In this case, it was looking at just making sure that there's no malicious access, there's no malicious processes being spawned. So it's more of what am I trying to say here? That retroactive observability, or perhaps a forensics perspective on it, as opposed to that integrity preservation in the sense of here are signed commits, signed builds, signed artifacts. So I think you're right, is that we need to explore a little bit more about what are the pieces necessary to get to an SBOM, so that we say, yes, here is just what everything is within our package, but that package was also built in a secure manner, step by step, and it didn't leak credentials. It didn't introduce an expanded attack surface that would surprise us after the fact.
Yeah, this looks. I haven't got a chance to play with it yet. This looks interesting. The fact, it looks like basically they're using eBPF to gather the data, and then what do you do with it? But yeah, right. This is in a way is another form of I guess. Well, I want to call it static analysis, but I think they're doing a little dynamic. There's multiple ways to sort of go around solving this problem, and it probably is going to take a combination of a bunch of these different tools, but this looks like it has potential to help out.
There's speaking of potential to help out, the other callback to last week's episode was we talked about complexity versus security, which actually emerged out as bad design is what in many cases weakens security. And that's bad design in tools, bad design in processes, bad design in user interfaces. And I pulled in this multi-instance service disruption from Salesforce, roughly, what was it, a 24 or 48-hour outage that hit Salesforce that boiled down to DNS. It's always DNS, of course. That's the eternal joke that will always be true. But what was interesting about this is that, one, I do like the idea of seeing relatively transparent postmortems, and there were a lot of lessons if you look through this and the technical details and their root cause analysis. And three things that at least that they called out was a lack of automation with safeguards for their DNS changes. So that sounds like weaknesses in the design of their tooling. There were insufficient guardrails in the change management process. So again, sounds to me like a bad design in process. And here's a little bit judgmental, and this is where it may go not quite off the rails, but subversion of the emergency break fix process. This is starting to get into that sort of blame the user aspect of the postmortem here, or blame the user, when we actually have to ask ourselves, was this EBF process, this emergency break fix process, was it actually misused? Or is it a little bit easier to say after the fact, this was really embarrassing, and in fact we had a insider working under the guise of a good actor in the sense of trying to fix something, who made a universal rollout of a DNS change that just so happened to trigger a cascading DNS outage. And if something is that brittle, maybe it's not so much the user's fault, or it's just you can always pin the blame on one person in this case. So that felt a little bit of an antithesis to the idea of a good blameless postmortem, or a good introspection in the sense of, what should we have fixed here? What could we have done better? So process helps people rather than just saying, oh, this was a human error, let's move on, like the Phil Venable article cautioned against.
I mean, it's pretty great from the point of view. It's for a RFO, reason for outage. It's a really great post, right? I mean, it's pretty long and pretty meaty, and they're asking the right questions. And I think anybody out there, if you're doing anything even close to operations, just go through and just take their questions they're asking. What precipitated chain of events? How frequent are DNS changes made? Blah, 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 blah. What went wrong? Just having this list of questions to ask internally, not alone be brave enough to post out to the world in a post like this. That's a really great thing. I'll editorialize, which I guess is what I do here, a little bit in that saying, two things. One, I've told people before, I'll tell people again, don't run your own status site. Let a third party run your status site for this exact specific reason. And now I've got that off my chest. The second thing around that is, I bet there's a lot of Salesforce people that were part of their sales pitch was, hey, you don't want to be running your own sales automation software like Sugar CRM. You should be trusting a third party who can do it right. And that's always a little tough. And none of us are perfect, so this stuff's going to happen. And yeah, I'm at that point, I'm gum flapping, but good. Still think it's a good read.
It is still a good read. And the other thing is really nice too, just to add to what you said, is, as I always do, is at the end of it, those next steps. And those next steps should be a great shout out to all the project managers out there, because look at, it's broken down into what's in progress, what's completed. There's some dates. There's actually some specific actionable items that were laid out quite transparently here. So kudos for that, for as much as, perhaps it's not necessarily a good look for a lot of perhaps what their marketing content might have been, or sales content might have been preaching. But there's another article here that I also pulled out, reaching back, as I always do, into the history of application security. This one is a little bit, maybe a tenuous connection to application security, but I'm going to get one in there. Just wait, John. Wired had a great article about the RSA hack. So this happened 10 years ago. And it was an insight that I don't know that it revealed too much new and insightful about what happened when RSA was compromised and the seeds to the RSA tokens were extracted. What was, to do a quick summary for those of you who aren't as familiar with that specific history or don't want to dive into the article yet. It started off with a user in Australia clicked on a link essentially or opened a Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet compromised their endpoint. From that endpoint, there were two teams, in fact, of these attackers that pivoted all the way from that endpoint in Australia up to their manufacturing systems that were air-gapped, at least air-gapped on paper, but when you have a firewall connection, even if it's a one-way firewall connection, that doesn't sound like an air-gap to me. But what this meant was that the seeds, the cryptographic seeds for these one-time number generators could now be reused, and you didn't need access to the hardware token. You could just create your own virtual ones ad hoc. Now, the message here that I wanted to tie into Application Security Weekly is using this as a tabletop exercise. Just, John, as you were mentioning about, read through the questions that were asked in the outage article that we were just talking about from Salesforce. There's a lot of questions you can ask here to your development team in the sense of, where are our most critical assets? Where are our most critical certificates? If we're using certificate-based service-to-service authentication, where are our root CAs? How are they protected? Could new CAs be minted? What happened? What would happen if someone compromised our root CA and could mint service-to-service connectivity? So there's a lot of these types of tabletop exercises that I think could be reproduced here, or this article could be used as perhaps some inspiration for that type of thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely, I can't believe it's been 10 years, but it's interesting for folks to go and just, remind yourself, even the big guys can get hit, right? They weren't being 100% perfect, but still it sounded like they had done a pretty good design on this. It sounds like the guys themselves that were actually working on this were shocked to see that the ops guys were shocked to see it had been compromised. So, there's always space for improvement. Keep listening to Application Security Weekly.
There we go. We should just going to end the podcast right there.
Like and subscribe.
Message. Thanks, John. Like and subscribe. I do have, I guess, two final things. One is just a quick shout out to a fun KubeCon presentation that a lot of people were talking about, that I thought was really neat in this era of virtual conferences and virtual presentations. One is just, the title is the aspect of hacking into Kubernetes security for beginners. So that's the title. And it could have been a kind of static, monotone presentation reading off slides bullet by bullet, which everyone would fall asleep to. Or it could have even been a more dynamically vocalized reading off every single bullet from a slide. But it was not. It was a pretty fun production values to see a journey, essentially, the life of a Kubernetes dev trying to get their work done and running into some points of friction and running into some conflict with the security team. And I thought it was kind of a fun callback to the idea to our last segment, in the sense of application security, developers working together. What is a counter example of not helpful collaboration? And so you can use that as sort of a lesson to say, oh, this is what better collaboration could look like. And it was pretty neat just to see that. And a couple of key phrases that I loved was starting off in the sense of, I'm not calling the security people, they are not fun. So if that's what your developer, if that's kind of the developer attitude, that's a signal right there. That's one of those metrics to adjust. One of the other things I'll say, shout out to Kubernetes, was the comment was, yeah, the documentation was right. So good documentation is good documentation to have. And I will say, one of my favorite quotes that I may have to adapt and use in the future is that we're made of stars, but your RBAC shouldn't be. So I just thought that was a great line. So John, don't know if you had a chance to watch this one or if you'd seen this one before, or any of the other presentations at KubeCon, but this was a neat one. This stood out to me.
I'm embarrassed to say I haven't watched this one yet. I saw it got awesome press coverage, which is great, right? It's like, again, as I was just saying, we need to get our security people talking outside of our little bubble. So they weren't giving this talk at the Cloud Native Security Day. They gave it at KubeCon, which I think is awesome. They're all awesome people. I think I've worked with all of them now at CNCF or Kubernetes, different working groups and stuff. So yeah, not surprised. This is a great little bit of security entertainment. How about that?
Yeah, and to your point too, I'm trying not to just repeat everything you say, but you say a lot of interesting things. And I think the important point you said was this was geared towards developers, and that's the message to bring. I mean, you even mentioned earlier in this episode, John, that we're kind of preaching to the choir about just what is supply chain security. And yes, I'm trying to avoid using the phrase solar winds. Every time I say that, I think of honestly, I think of Spelljammer for you D&D fans out there, and I want to come up with something like phlogiston and astral breeze and talk giant space hamsters instead of APTs. So that will be my own editorial riff. But the editorial riff here was that why don't we talk about security to the developers in the way the developers need and where the developers are? So rather than invite the developers or expect them to come to all of our security conferences, let's bring that security message to the developers' conferences. And even better, as this one did, let's bring that message in a great communication skills and a great narrative. So definitely fun. Yeah. Go check it out. Of course, after you've watched this episode of Application Security Weekly. That sounds like a great message to end on, John. Anything that you think we should wrap up here before we say goodbye and depart onto another week of reading up on what happens in the news?
I think that's I'm going to have to go watch that video next. That's my thing. My talk I was just checking, which I did at Cloud Native Security Day, is out on YouTube. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit next week or two. I did a pretty interesting talk about security nutrition labels for open source projects. So for people who need a little more watching, they can watch that, or hopefully we'll talk about it in a future episode.
Sounds like a tasty topic. And it also sounds like this time I've got some homework to do to go watch that video. So thank you for that, John. The tables have been turned. And speaking of turntables, I hope you're always enjoying the security new wave post-punk security hour. I want to thank John for joining me. I want to thank everybody in the Discord channel for chatting with us along as we chat as on the episode right now. And want to thank everybody for listening, like, and subscribe. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.